In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the timing cover on this Chevy Silverado. Let's get into it. We're going to disconnect the battery. You can disconnect the negative terminal using a 10mm wrench. If you need to, you can take this plate out of here, but it's not necessary. You can work around it. Loosen that up. And slide that off and out of the way. Pull this cover off, just get underneath here, lift up, and slide it out. Take an 8mm socket, loosen up the worm clamp right here, and also right here. And using a prying tool, like a trim tool, just get underneath here. You want to separate the hose from the snorkel. Take this hose off here, just pop this off, just pry that out. Now grab the snorkel, slide it up, there's that bushing right there. Slide it forward and over on the side. And pull that out. We're going to take the serpentine belt off. You can use a 15mm wrench or a serpentine belt tool. And just slide that off. Release the tensioner and slide the wrench off. And then you can slide the belt off. Remove this cover. You want to take these 4 bolts out. Use a 15mm socket. And remove the cover. Remove this cover. Use a 15mm socket. Pull it down. Now we're going to take the stretch belt off. If you're going to replace it, you can just cut it. It's not going to be a big deal. Use just a utility knife or some side cutters. I'm just going to use a prying tool and just go behind here. As I turn the crank, it's just going to pop the belt off. Just be careful. And there we go. Slid right off. And pull the belt off. Now we can reuse it. Now using a 24mm socket, we want to take off the crank bolt. Pull that off. Now you're going to need a crank pulley puller tool, or like a 3-jaw puller. Slide that in place. It's going to grab on and then tighten this down. And now just tighten this. As I tighten it, it's just going to pull the pulley out. I might need a wrench. I'll put a wrench on there. That's it. It slides right out. We're going to remove the belt tensioner. Use a 15mm socket. Take these bolts out. And slide that out. We're going to take this lower radiator hose. There's no drain on the radiator, so on this vehicle we'll just take off the hose. You want to make sure that you have a drain bucket underneath or a catch pan. I'm using some hose clamp pliers to remove the hose clamp. And you can see some of the coolant's coming out. Just give it a wiggle. Oh, pull it off. Let it drain. Try to let it drain slowly. Now I'll take off the top hose using the same hose clamp tool. Wiggle that off and just move the hose out of the way. Just using a trim tool, just prying this hose, this clamp out of the way so I can move the hose over there. Now we're going to take the heater hoses off the same way. Some more coolant's going to come out. Pull those off. Using a 10mm socket, we're going to take these 3 bolts out on each side. And when you take the last one out, just support the water pump. And just grab it and slide it out. You're gonna lose some more coolant. I'm gonna use a 15mm wrench and take the drain plug off. It's located right here on the passenger side. Make sure you have a drain bucket underneath. And drain the oil out. You want to replace the seal for the drain plug. Just get a pick and get underneath the seal. Pull the old one off and put a new one on. We don't have a new seal, so we're going to be okay. Now we'll just put the drain plug back in. And I'm going to torque the drain plug to 18 foot-pounds. Now we're going to take this bar out of the way, use an 18mm wrench and an 18mm socket. Take these bolts out. Out and just take a pry bar and just pry this down. And pull it out. Disconnect the front drive shaft. I already marked this. Just use some type of a crayon or a marker and just mark just so when you put it back together, you're not going to have any unwanted vibrations that weren't there before. Using an 11mm socket, take these bolts out. Flip this around, take these ones out. And using a pry bar, just pry this back and out of the way. I'm just going to bungee the drive shaft out of the way up top. It shouldn't be in my way anyway, but just in case. Just get it completely out of the way. This connector right here, you want to disconnect that. You can just use a pick or a screwdriver. Just get underneath and then pop that off. And then there's some wire retainers holding it in. You want to take those off or release them with a pick. Just pop those off and then follow the wire. There should be another one up here. Just going to use a trim tool to pop that off. And just pop that off. And there's one more further up. You really can't see this one, but you just have to feel around for it. The same thing, just pop that off. That's good. This breather hose right here, you want to pop that off. Just use a pick and just pop that hose off. There you go, just like that. We're going to take these bolts out of the axle. Before we do that, I'm just going to mark this. We just want to put it back together in the same way it came apart. Using a 15mm socket, we'll take these bolts out. One. Take those out. We can separate that. We're going to do the same on the other side. Underneath, I'm just going to support the differential with a pull jack just to keep it from falling before we take it out. We're going to take these two nuts off, use a 21mm socket. Now there's two bolts on this side, use an 18mm socket, take these out. Now I'm going to just have a partner help me remove this differential. First we're going to take the pull jack out of the way, I'll just support this. Drop that, just pull it out of the way. There you go. We'll drop this down. I'm just gonna alright. It's gonna be tipped this way. And there we go. Pull it down. I'm gonna use a 10mm socket, take this bolt out right here. Then this wiring harness will slide, and then you can remove it, slide it out of the way. Now we're going to take this bracket off, use a 10mm ratchet wrench, take this bolt out. This is the clips for the transmission cooler lines. It's on the passenger side. Take that out and just slide the bracket out of the way. Because of this tube right here, the oil pan's gonna have to come down pretty far. We're gonna drop the steering rack down a little bit, so we'll take the steering rack bolts out. You're gonna get those from the other side. Using a 24mm socket, take these two bolts out. Rack's going to drop down a little bit. And on the other side, we're going to take these two bolts out, use an 18mm socket. And slide that out. Take these two bolts out, use a 15mm socket. Take this bolt out right here, use a 10mm socket. This is for a cover that's on the side here. Just take that off. On the side where the starter is, there's another 10mm bolt. Just use a 10mm socket. Take that out. You can just slide this to the side a little bit. You don't have to take that off. You'd have to take the starter off to get that off completely. These two bolts, you want to take those out, use a 10mm socket. Then around the perimeter of the oil pan, you want to take all these bolts out using a 10mm socket. The last one. Just grab the oil pan, rock it down a little bit. Just slide it down, and it comes right out. Disconnect the connector right here. Slide that down. Then we want to take this bracket off. You're going to use a 10mm socket. Take this bolt out right here. And this bolt right here. We want to disconnect that connector. Slide that bracket off. You can pull this sensor out if you're going to be replacing the cover. If not, you can just leave it in there. It'll be fine. Now we're going to remove all these bolts around the outside of the timing cover. Use a 10mm socket. This one right here is a little bit tricky to get to because the bracket's in the way. You might have to use a wrench on that one. just because the bracket's in the way. Just a 10mm wrench. Once you get it loose, you can do it by hand. Pull that one out, and the other ones are a little easier to get to. Now grab the cover and just pull it straight towards the front of the vehicle. Slides right out. Now we're going to take the gasket off if it's still stuck to the engine. Just grab that, pull it off. You can use a razor blade or a scraper if there's any excess material. Just want to scrape it off. Or just take a rag and wipe it down with some brake parts cleaner. Now I'm just going to clean up the surface area where the gasket's going to meet. Just use some brake parts cleaner and a rag. If you have to, if there's any thick material, you want to use a scraper or a razor blade. We need to remove the old gasket. There is rivets holding it on. I'm just going to take a rag and you want to put it in these holes right here. You don't want any of the filings to get in there while you're drilling it out, so, because that's where the oil passages are. Just take a drill, just drill them out. And that's separated right there. And the other one's over here. Pop the gasket off. Make sure you get all the filings out of the pan. We can clean that up after. And take a punch and just punch the rivet out the rest of the way. There we go. Now just clean this off. Take the gasket, line it up. I'm going to take the cover and just take some brake parts cleaner and a rag and just wipe down the surface area where the gasket's gonna seat. And also on the bottom here. And if there's any RTV on the corners, you want to clean that up with a razor blade. Just going to take a dab of RTV and just put it on the corner right there and right there. We're going to put more later, but just a little bit. Now take the cover. You can get the bolts started with the gasket on the back side. Just line the gasket up. Slide the cover in position. And get all the bolts started. We just want to snug these down, but we still want the cover to be loose because we're going to have to make adjustments. We need the cover to be able to move just slightly. Now where the corners are, you're going to take a little RTV and just spread it right there. Not too much. Just where the two surfaces meet. And then same on the back side. And right here, you can see where the two pieces of metal meet. The back cover with the engine. There and right there. Just a little dab. Now with the gasket on the pan, slide this in position. Make sure it goes under the wires or over the wires. And wiggle it in place. Take some of the bolts, get those started. Now they're all in, you just snug them up. You put the two longer bolts in the back. Which ones? Now we're going to torque these bolts to 18 foot-pounds. I'm going to start in the center and just alternate going back and forth, side to side, to tighten it down evenly. I'll put these bolts in, get those started. And tighten these down. Now we'll torque these to 18 foot-pounds. Now the wiring harness, you can get this lined up front. And get the bolt started. Tighten that bolt down. Then this bracket where the transmission lines go in. We're going to get the bolt started there. I'd have to wiggle it a little, get it to line up. And snug that down. Now put the starter cover in place and get that bolt started. Snug that down. cover that goes right here. Slide that in place. And get the bolt started. Tighten it down. Take the camshaft sensor, slide that in place. That's good right there. The bracket with the wiring harness on it. You want to plug it in. Line that up. Lock it down. And take the two bolts. Get those started. Snug those down. Take the connector, line it up, lock it down. Now put the harmonic balancer on, the crank pulley. Then you want to use a crank pulley installer. If you don't have one, you can try to use a bolt that's long enough. Just get that started. And put the brand new crank bolt in. I'll just tighten this down the rest of the way. To prevent the engine from spinning, you're going to have to pop this cover off just with a straight blade screwdriver. Then just with a pry bar, you can just pry right here. Just hold that there while you're tightening down the bolt. Now with someone holding the crank from spinning, then we're going to torque this to 59 foot-pounds and then an additional 125 degrees. .59 foot-pounds, and then if you have a torque angle meter, you want to go an additional 125 degrees. If you don't, do the best you can. That's good. Now take the steering rack bolts, get those started. You can put some thread lock adhesive on those. Push the steering rack up. Get that lined up. All right, those are all in place. Now we can tighten those down. We're going to get the differential back in. Get it lined up. Either use a partner to help you get it in, or if you have a hoist, raise it up. Just be careful, it is pretty heavy. Make sure the axles are out of the way. pry bar, pry it in place. There we go. Make sure you don't squish any of the wires or hoses. Put these two nuts in. And these two bolts, get these started. Here and right here. And tighten them down. And the two nuts. Now we can lower the support. Now take this wire, push the retainers in place. This is going to go around here and connect into that actuator. Just make sure all the retainers are where they need to be. This is clipped in. Take the breather, get that lined up. The bent hose. And push that back on. Just like that. Take the bungee cord off the drive shaft. And get this lined up. And put the caps back on and the bolts. Get those tightened down. Now I'm just going to use a pry bar to prevent the drive shaft from spinning, and I'm going to torque these bolts to 18 foot-pounds. Spin around, do the same on this side. Now make sure the axles are lined up, how you took them apart, and get the bolts started. And go all the way around first before you tighten them down. Now we'll tighten these down. I'm going to start on one side. Just snug it and spin the wheel. Get to the complete opposite side. Tighten this one down. Then go around again, back to the one that was snugged, and then start tightening them down. That's all of them. Do the same on the other side. And take this cross member, line this up. You can take a rubber mallet, tap it in place. Get the holes to line up. And take the bolts, get those started. Go up a little more. Get the nuts started. Now we'll tighten these down. Now you want to clean up the surface area where the water pump gaskets are going to go. You can use a scraper if you need to, or just wipe it with a rag and some brake parts cleaner. If you're reusing the old water pump, you want to make sure you clean these surfaces. Now take the bolts, get these started. At least 2 of the bolts. Then you can take the gaskets, put the gasket on, that'll hold just like that. Do the same on this side. Get that lined up. And trying not to tip it so the bolts don't fall out. Get this lined up. Now you can put the other bolts in, get those all started. We're going to start by torquing these to 11 foot-pounds first. Then we're going to go around again and torque these to 22 foot-pounds. Now you want to put the heater hoses on. that up. That looks good. And a lower radiator hose. Oops. Put the belt tensioner on, line that up, and tighten the bolts down. Tighten those bolts down. And I'll take the upper radiator hose, get that lined up. And slide it in place. That's good. Resecure the retainer, push that down. Now we're going to put the stretch belt on. Just go over the crank pulley, over to the AC compressor, and up to the top. You can use this special tool to install it. Just line that up. So that's lined up. The tool's on. I'm going to turn the crank. But you want to be careful over here near the AC compressor because sometimes it can walk its way off that pulley. So just go around here. Just like this. Watch your fingers. There we go, that's lined up all the way around. And there we go, take the tool off. Now put the shields up, get that lined up, put the bolts in. Put this shield up. Get that started. And tighten these down. Now take the Serpentine belt, go around the crank pulley, around the water pump, around the power steering pump, up to the alternator, and around the tensioner. And we're going to hold this down, and then you can take your wrench on the tensioner, loosen the tension on the belt, and go underneath the idler. Just like that. And just double check, make sure it's around everything properly, all the pulleys. It's going to be pulled out a little bit. Alright, that's good. It's around the crank pulley. Everything's good. Now take the snorkel, line it up. You should get that grommet in and then line it up over on the air filter box. Good. And tighten these down. Push that hose in. Lock it down. You can reattach this right there. Make sure those hoses are in those brackets. And put the engine cover on, line it up in the back, and push it down. And connect the cable to the negative battery terminal. Get that on, and we'll tighten that down. Snug that down. Just give it a wiggle, make sure it's tight. Now you want to add the appropriate coolant, fill it up to where the full line is. Run the vehicle for about 10 or 15 minutes, monitoring to make sure that the engine's not overheating. Then shut the vehicle off, let the vehicle cool down, and double check and adjust accordingly. Remove the oil cap using a funnel, and then we're going to use the appropriate oil. You can see on the cap, this one says 5W30. So we're going to use a full synthetic 5W30 oil. Now when you're done filling that, take the funnel out, put the oil cap back on, and you want to start the vehicle, let it run for about 15 seconds. Shut the vehicle down, pull the dipstick out, and then check your level, and then adjust accordingly.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.